Hey guys, welcome to another episode of InRange. Got an interesting video here today that Fagan and I have been talking about for what, years?
Couple years now.
Couple years. The idea, and you broached this first, but the minute you said it, it made sense to me. The idea that the NFA, the 1934 National Firearms Act, and to some degree the subsequent 1968 Gun Control Act, because it reinforced it, is ableist. Now, if you don't know what ableist means, essentially it means creating a system or infrastructure in which people who are differently abled can't function as well as someone who's like, quote, normally abled. So an example of that would be like a building that's inaccessible to a wheelchair. It has only stairs, no elevators, so someone in a wheelchair can't get up, right?
Correct. Or
an example of books that are only written in text and not available in Braille for someone who's blind. That would be an ableist example. These are simple examples. This goes on and on and on and on. But when it comes to the NFA, you had some really interesting thoughts about this.
Yeah, and it really came out of doing firearms training for a wide variety of individuals over the last couple decades and observing people at brutality matches. And that shorter, smaller statured, less physically strong people significantly benefit more from having a shorter, lighter gun. And to that end, short-barreled rifles specifically are way more advantageous to smaller, less physically capable people than they are to, say, 6 foot tall, 250 plus pound males like we are.
Sure. Now, before we even get into that part of it, which is the physicality element, there's also an economic ableism here too. When the NFA was originally created, there was a $200 tax stamp, which never changed. It's continued to be $200 still today. But $200 in 1934, you looked it up, it was thousands of dollars.
Yeah, it'd be into the thousands today.
So what that means is that when the NFA was created, it meant that the only people that could possibly buy a short-barreled rifle or a short-barrel shotgun, we're leaving machine guns off the table for this conversation, or a suppressor for that matter, were people that were already pretty much rich.
Right.
Because you were paying way more for the tax stamp than you were the gun.
Yeah.
Like the gun might be $50, the stamp was $200.
Yeah, they made it prohibitively expensive. So classist in that example.
That would be classist, yeah, fair. That's a better way to put it, classist. So up until now in 2024, they never actually increased the value of the stamp. So now $200 is quite reasonable compared to the value of the gun. But the ableist issue, in terms of physicality and people, still exists. So you were looking up, like for example, in 1934, the average stature of a male at that time
was usually around 5'9" and 160 to 170 pounds.
Okay, and so obviously we're talking about probably if they had the money, a $200 tax stamp at the time, they're probably, let's be realistic, a pretty rich white guy that was well nourished, right? That wasn't some impoverished person living in a ghetto that had $200 for a tax stamp. So when you're doing that average, I bet you the average for the people that had resources was probably higher than that.
Right.
Is that a fair statement? So, but now we're still existing in this place, and it was one of the things that was an inspiration, I must admit, to the What Would Stoner Do build-out process, is you had done a gun a long time ago, based on a polymer lower and a lightweight upper for someone who was, I believe, only had one arm?
Yeah, they were a single arm amputee at the shoulder, so they had nothing below the shoulder to work with.
Okay.
So I built something that was lightweight, operable with one hand, in fact even had like an integrated sling system to operate the charging handle for that person, and it made it so they could much more easily operate the rifle one-handed.
Actually, specifically what the braces were intended for as well, right? To strap it onto your arm.
Right.
But that was still a full-length gun because you couldn't do an SBR for that person.
Correct.
So let's go more into what you've seen as a trainer in regards to this being ableist in terms of the people and their capabilities and body size and structure.
It becomes most apparent when there's a choice between using a long gun and a handgun.
Okay.
And that some people do not have the strength, or they're injured with long-term injuries to the point that they cannot shoot a handgun as well as a fully abled person can.
Okay.
And even if they could get to the point where they're shooting at a comparable level, like the level of effort to accomplish that is significantly higher than just using a gun with a stock on it. To give you a better idea of what we're talking about, we're going to show some examples of shooters engaging the same types of targets at the same distances with pistol versus PCC or SBR. This shooter just finished engaging with an M9. Now they're engaging using a gun with a stock and a red dot. Very big difference in performance. And it is true that with skill, this gap in performance narrows. Some people have physical limitations that simply can't make this happen. Allie here is reasonably capable with a long gun and the multiple points of support it offers. Unfortunately, several years ago, she sustained an injury to the sensory branch of her radial nerve in her right dominant arm. What this means today, even years later, is that her right arm becomes fatigued much more easily, and if she keeps training past the point of fatigue, it can escalate to pain and trembling as the nerve becomes further taxed. This isn't something that can be trained around. In fact, the more training she does trying to shoot a handgun well, the worse this problem becomes. But using something with a stock like this CZ Scorpion short-barreled rifle, it essentially becomes a non-issue. Much better accuracy with much less pain and discomfort. This video was submitted by one of our patrons of his wife shooting. She suffers from CMT, which is a neuropathy that is characterized by a loss of sensation over time over the extremities of the body and a progressive loss of muscle tissue. In the message he sent us, he explains that his wife really can't handle more than a .22 rimfire pistol, and in this video shooting a 9mm Glock, it's obvious that it's hard for her to control. This short-barreled 9mm AR-15 is her favorite to shoot and what she uses for home defense because she feels the most capable with it.
This is Gun Bunny, and she's one of our awesome competitors at brutality matches, and she sent this video in to us with this description. I am 5'3" and 100 pounds. I actually have EDS, which is a genetic illness that basically messes up my joints, causing me to have hypermobility in all my joints, widespread arthritis at the age of 20, smaller wrists, and my elbows have issues with basically flipping around. Having a stock on a pistol is a game changer for my specific condition, and I'm super comfortable disclosing this in the video. Well, even for someone such as myself that doesn't have such challenges, a pistol is far harder to use than any type of proper long arm, whether it's a shotgun, a PCC, or a rifle. Even a full-length one, having all those points of contact make it far easier to shoot not only at close range, but at distance, recoil recovery, accuracy, etc. And that's for me, who doesn't have those challenges. For a person who's got grip strength issues or other issues, a handgun is even more of a challenge.
And then you add into, if they do go to a long gun for home defense purposes versus using a handgun, they're stuck with something unless they want to go through the NFA process that's longer, more unwieldy. And in particular, if you go with like the traditional like shotgun argument for home defense, those guns can be really unwieldy for a small statured person who isn't as physically strong and able to handle them. And I've seen that in training. I've seen that at matches consistently. Take the same person, like at home defense distances, and you give them a pump action shotgun. They're going to struggle with it. Hand them a 8-inch barreled PCC, short barreled rifle. They're going to do dramatically better with it, with a lot less effort.
On top of that, even if they've got the resources and time and ability and live in a state where they could get an SBR, because that's not even the case in some places, now you have a problem traveling with it.
All right, you got to ask permission every time you leave the state.
Yeah, so if you're going to go on a road trip and you're going to bring you are a person that needs an SBR or some sort of short-barreled PCC because it's more capable for you to handle it and use it, and you're going on a road trip across New Mexico from Arizona, you now have to file for permission just to bring your self-defense item with you.
And well in advance, too, to make sure you get that permission back before you go on your trip.
Yep, so it really compounds. First of all, economic, then the physicality issue, and then on top of that, you essentially have to beg and grovel to keep the thing you've trained with you if you should need it.
And to bring the classist angle back around, ammo is becoming more and more expensive compared to the rate of inflation. So those of us who learned to shoot when ammo was comparatively cheaper, yes, everything gets more expensive over time with inflation.
Sure.
But ammo has gone up dramatically more versus the rate of inflation. So those of us who learned to shoot 10, 15, 20 years ago are at an advantage versus people who are learning to shoot today where ammo is more expensive. And there are, technological hacks that are making it easier. Like optics on handguns are making it easier for people to shoot more accurately today than before. So less ammo required to accomplish the same result. However, if you give that same person the stability of a stock, it shortcuts the whole training process.
Yeah, I've seen it myself when we're out with people and they're shooting with a handgun and struggling. Like when you're new at this, like even a 10-yard target with a handgun could be a challenge to someone, especially if they're under time stress or real stress. We're not even talking about like the self-defense. We're talking about just hitting a target with no pressure. Like that takes a lot of effort and skill and time to get good with that. You give them a PCC or a short barrel rifle, maybe not at 10 yards, you could push the target out to 50 for safety, and they're hitting like this. It's instantaneous.
And I think that's partly why we've seen PCC division become so popular in certain action shooting sports, even at our own CQB-oriented brutality matches where there are handgun divisions, there's PCC divisions. PCC division's more popular. We got a lot of novice shooters that it's a lower barrier of entry, and they can more easily hit all the targets with a PCC than they can with a handgun.
And that includes close and far, because with a PCC you can engage anything from near to far.
Yep.
Well, within reason, 200 yards. Like,
So what's interesting is, the NFA process has become more accessible as far as knowledge on how to do it.
It has.
In the past decade or so. But that was met with the surge of braces as a workaround to not have to have an SBR because the process is too time consuming, it's expensive, and it's just too hard for most people to bother with.
Well, in fact, the reason for braces when they first got designed and hit the market was specifically and implicitly to help people who had able-bodied challenges to shoot normal guns. That was the whole intention of a brace, right?
Right.
That was the purpose from the beginning, from the get-go. But that would not have needed to exist if it hadn't been for the NFA in the first place.
Right. If the NFA didn't exist and we didn't have 90 years of restrained development, because for things to be developed, they have to be commercially viable, right?
Of course.
And the NFA makes things less commercially viable. So if we didn't have 90 years of restricted development, I think we would see things in the realm of the B&T USW, Universal Service Weapon, or the Flux Raider, or particularly like we just saw the Flux P365 come out, where you can actually concealed carry that thing and it auto deploys a brace or a stock, depending on the legal classification of your gun. And if we weren't restricted with what was legally available, I think we would see systems like that be much more common today for the role that a full-size duty handgun would fill.
I think that would be the standard self-defense weapon, or something like it.
Something similar to it. Maybe your home defense gun would be closer to like a 7 or 8 inch barreled Scorpion, or a P90,
or an MP5.
Yeah,
even.
Things those categories versus a shotgun. And I think the standard duty pistol or full-size carry pistol would be more like one of those Flux Raiders or a USW.
Actually, when you think back, when you think of early SWAT stuff and all that stuff, they didn't go in with handguns unless they had to. They brought MP5s and short-barreled shotguns and all that stuff. They didn't have those restrictions, and what did they choose?
Right.
There's a reason.
And I think the combination of a support device, be that stalker brace and a red dot on that classification of gun, is safer for everyone involved, and that there's going to be less missed shots, higher accuracy, and that applies whether it's the average armed citizen carrying it or the average patrolman and law enforcement carrying it, because using handguns well under stress requires constant training, constant skill maintenance. And the simple fact is, because I've done a lot of institutional training for, CCW, state level stuff, armed security guard stuff, most people are not going to train to the level that I would feel comfortable, carrying with. I take it very seriously. Not saying people's rights should be restricted at all. It's just there's lots of barriers to entry to getting that skill to where they're fully capable, fully competent as we'd like them to be. And I think it's not ideal and somewhat morally wrong to restrict the equipment they can use that would make them and everyone else safer if it wasn't artificially restricted through the NFA process.
Yeah, that's not to say there aren't people that can do amazing things with handguns. We've seen it.
Right.
We've seen self-defense incidents like that guy at the mall at the food court. It happens. But that's not normal. And that's not common. And the people that someone else with something, if someone hadn't been that person and they had to do that shot, there's a good chance it wouldn't have worked out. But with better equipment and not being restricted by artificial and arbitrary rules that are ableist, they would have been maybe to have a much more capable thing with them.
Yeah, and I think people wouldn't need to put as much time into getting good at these things if we weren't restricted, we'd kind of view like being good with a full-size unsupported pistol as like archaic skill, just like we're starting to view shooting well with iron sights as kind of an archaic skill.
We are.
And I think shooting a normal handgun would kind of fall into the same category if the technology wasn't artificially restricted.
So what's interesting about this is we hear a lot of people, for obvious reasons, having a lot of issues with not just the ATF but the NFA and the GCA. Why do we not hear? I find it curious because when we started talking about this, I'm like, I really haven't heard people say this much. I think that you've brought a lot of experience together to come to this conclusion that maybe people just that aren't doing training and such, or even our brutality matches, we see this, right? Unless you're seeing it, it's not as obviously palpable. But you can see a person out there struggling with their handgun. You put a PCC or SBR in their hands and they just clean up. But maybe people haven't seen that.
Yeah, I think there's you got to have the right combination of experience to think about something in this way. And I think this is potentially another legal way to go at the NFA with court cases, whether it's equal protection under the law or an Americans with Disabilities Act argument. I think there's something there that the right plaintiff could make a case that their rights are being infringed upon because they're having to pay a tax to exercise a right in the most effective way.
That they couldn't have done otherwise, and it's based on the fact that there's this arbitrary rule put in place that makes it impossible for them to do. Yeah. Well, any other thoughts?
I think that's about as succinct as we could get it. We've had a lot of conversations over the years as this opinion has developed, and just this past week, the courts reversed the ruling on braces again. The braces are legal again for now, but we don't know that it's going to stay that way.
No, what that should really be is SBRs should be just taken off of the NFA entirely.
Yeah, I think that is the best argument, that SBRs should be taken off the NFA because they are in de facto common use.
And this is already too long a video for this, but we don't even want to get into this. Suppressors are another problem, because if you have it for self-defense and you pick that thing up and use it, you're just blowing your eardrums out. But that's another problem, right? So anyways, hopefully you find this kind of interesting. I did. When you brought this up, I'm like, it's obvious. It makes so much sense. And I've seen it at our brutality matches with regularity. Not only in the way people sign up for the match, but also how they perform at the match with the right kind of gear. And that's even necessarily not even with an SB, not even with an SBR or a short barrel anything. Just going from a handgun to anything else makes them better. But if they could have a smaller, lighter anything, they'd be even better than that. We've seen that with the What Would Stoner Do carbines, not even short barrel, because they're just light.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So hopefully you found this interesting. Bring this up with your friends. This is a different angle to talk about this problem. And so many of our laws are ableist. This is just one example thereof, but a pretty significant one for someone that's lost a life because they couldn't defend themselves. Hopefully you enjoyed this, or at least found this interesting and compelling. Please consider supporting us, patreon.com/InRangeTV. Subscribe, hit the bell, share with your friends. This is a conversation that should be had. Thanks for watching.